Welcome back to ZMS Esports Studio, your home for all things virtual cycling and virtual racing. Of course, you're joined by me, your host Mark, today as we continue to look at Chase the Yellow. What is Chase the Yellow? Well, as we continue as roadies and cyclists all around the world to celebrate the Tour de France, we have put together 9 stages of racing fun to bring together contenders from around the world. But what are those 9 stages? Well, we have zipped our way through stages 1 through 7, and well, time flies when you're having fun, doesn't it, my friends? And we took on Sion on Tuesday, but today we take on stage 8 Mont Vernier. Before Saturday we take on the final stage, Versailles to Paris. But let's take a closer look at Mont Vernier. Well, it is gonna be 32.1 kilometers of mixed elevation racing fun. So while we do have a lot of very pinchy climbing going on today, we will also have a nice little trough, a nice little plateau out of that elevation that's going to give sprinters a chance to shine before we come into those all-important switchbacks leading us up to the Catholic Commune at the top. So let's take a look at the contenders that will be taking on today's race and taking on Mont Vernier. So this is the spread of our 16 teams that we'll see on course today. But let's take a closer look, beginning with those OTR teams. Beginning with OTR Punchers. And continuing with OTR's second team in Chase the Yellow, OTR Spartans. And who can forget the team that has brought us fierce European sprinters such as Lorenzo Simons and Walter Claus? It is Moon Riders. And partnering with us here at ZMS Esports Studio for Chase the Yellow is E-Cycle Club Denmark with E-Cycle Club Denmark Team 1. And not forgetting E-Cycle Club Denmark Team 2. And we have a very interesting union team between 2 teams that will be familiar to viewers of Love Triple T and the React E-Cycling Race Series. That is the West London VR team, unionized with the Pedalers team to make West London Pedalers. And bringing those swift Scottish riders to the fore is Glasgow United Cycling Club. And the team that is proving to be the one to beat, it's Race 3R. But we can't forget the fierce contenders who are bringing some heat to the tarmac with Razio Racing. Now we drop beneath the equator for RGT Australia, beginning with The Bike Place. And continuing with Skippy Anderson. And of course we can't forget the team of sprinters and one fierce climber with Cadel Sharks. And we also have the female Aussie team, Spratties Koalas. And hoping to soar into the race today, we have Stewie's Magpies. And I'm sure they're looking to set off like a rocket. We do have Rocket Robbie. And last but certainly not least by any means, we have Oppie's Stars. So now that we've taken a look at the teams and the contenders taking on today's race, why don't we jump on over to take a look at the GC, otherwise known as General Classification, aka the results so far. So bear in mind that this is cumulative time across all stages, and we are going up until stage 7 so far, and this is men's GC, and we have still holding on very securely to that top spot Jonathan Orr with Race 3R with a cumulative time from stages 1 through 7 of 6 hours 31 minutes and 11 seconds. Kasper Hederdam is very hot on that rear wheel, however, for E-Cycle Club Denmark Team 1 with an accumulative time of 6 hours 34 minutes and 43 seconds. Jonathan Orr's teammate Said Keradine is also very hot on the heels of that top spot with a cumulative time of 6 hours 38 minutes and 34 seconds. Cadel Sharks Bo Duke is also very hot in that contention of the top 5 in the men's GC, 6 hours 38 minutes and 35 seconds. And rounding out the top 5 for the men's GC is Tristan Dimmock once again of Cadel Sharks with 6 hours 39 minutes and 29 seconds. So there's barely 10 minutes in the top 5 there. In fact, under 10 minutes. But we've taken a look at the men's GC. Why don't we jump on over and take a look at the women's GC? Where, again, holding on very tightly to the top spot is Kat Coleman of Sprattys Koalas. And we can see, since the race with time slot 2, that actually Judy Franco has once again managed to break up the top 5 being in minutes and 14 seconds. Followed hotly by Michelle Williams with 8 hours, 36 minutes and 57 seconds. So 4 minutes 43 behind Kat Coleman. And also helping to pad out that team, continuing the top 4 out of the top 5 is Melissa Fanning. 8 hours, 38 minutes and 31 seconds. 6 minutes and 17 seconds behind her teammate there. Wendy Gallagher, aka Wendy Wonderwheels, is sitting at 9 hours, 37 minutes and 35 seconds, 1 hour, 5 minutes and 21 seconds behind her teammate Kat. But as we just discussed, breaking up the top 5 being entirely dominated by one team is Judy Franco with 10 hours, 22 minutes and 59 seconds, 1 hour, 50 minutes and 45 seconds behind Kat. So we've seen how the individual contenders fare, but what has this done to the Team GC? Well, let's take a closer examination. So Race 3R still holding on very tightly to that top spot once again, but as you can see, and I'm not going to spoil it just yet, but you can see that Cadel Sharks are very close to beating that time. So Race 3R, again, cumulative time, but this time it's from first rider over the finish line to last within any given team for all 7 stages, allowing Race 3R to sit at 20 hours, 3 minutes and 38 seconds cumulative, stages 1 through 7. Cadel Sharks, only 1 minute and 8 behind for 20 hours, 4 minutes and 46 seconds. Razio Racing, I'm sure we haven't seen the last of fierce attacks from Igor and from Mark Rowbottom, but they are currently sitting at 20 hours, 39 minutes and 30 seconds, 35 minutes and 51 seconds behind Race 3R. Now, a team that has very comfortably broken into the top 5 over the last couple of stages is Glasgow, Scotland's Glasgow United Cycling Club, with 20 hours, 56 minutes and 10 seconds, putting them 52 minutes and 31 seconds behind Race 3R's pole position time. And Moonriders, with those all-important sprinters such as Lorenzo Simons and Walter Claus, are sitting at 21 hours, 19 minutes and 16 seconds, putting them 1 hour, 15 minutes and 37 seconds behind to round out the top 5 for the Team's GC. But we have a very mixed bag of a course today, and it could all hinge on this, my friends. So, with that said, why don't we jump on over to the start line, look at the pens, watch them begin to fill out with our riders. so that we can get ready for the palpable race ahead. So what do we have on screen here? Before we start, if you're new to watching this today, I'd like to quickly guide you through. In the center of the screen, you can see two video game windows from Wahoo RGT, which is the virtual cycling platform in which we are racing today. To the left, we have live, which is the Northern Hemisphere side of the race, which is going live at the time of this broadcast, also being live. To the right, we have time slot 1, which is a replay, see on screen there, and it's a recording of the Southern Hemisphere side of the race, aka Australia. And that is done, of course, so that we can accommodate everybody. Regardless of how people cross the finish line today, everything is going to be aggregated down into one scoring table, aka general classification. We will, of course, have some Northern Hemisphere contenders in this race. Perhaps they couldn't make the live time due to work commitments, family commitments, etc. But we can see in there we have Lorenzo Simons, who's been a regular in the Southern Hemisphere side of the race. And it's nice to have a European pad that out and lend some extra eyes to the Southern Hemisphere side of the race. By the way, there's a huge contingent of Aussies on Wahoo RGT, and it's fantastic to see. We'll talk a little bit more about the Aussies as we get into today's broadcast. So we're just under a minute from going live. We'll talk more about the elevation profile, which you can see on the bottom center of each of our broadcast windows, both live and time slot 1, as we get deeper into it and what that will mean to the physicality of today's race, as well as the physics a little bit, as much as I understand, not being a guy who is well educated on science, but I'll do my best with what I know, as also being a fellow roadie, as I do in previous broadcasts if you watched them before. But if you're new to this, hopefully that will lend something more to the race for you. So barely 20 seconds from going live, we can start to see the wattage numbers begin to peak, as you can see on the kind of black golden colored chart that we have on the left of each of the windows, as riders are beginning to get ready to gun off that start line. And here we go, a nice big press off of the start line. So let's jump on over to the Aussie side of the race. So we've got Ben Kirk, he's shooting off the front there. We've got Bo Duke here, another fierce contender in the race, and one of the top players, top racers among Cadel Sharks. Speaking of Bo Duke, it's an absolute phenomenon that he is even racing and riding at all. I believe several years ago now, Bo Duke had quite a major cervical spine surgery that had the potential to keep him off the bike permanently. But he has returned, both racing in the real world and in Wahoo RGT, and we've seen him be one of the most fiercest, if you will, contenders in Chase the Yellow Tour overall. So that's a wonderful thing to see. We've also got Wendy Wonder Wheels here, one of the top contenders alongside teammate Kat Coleman for Spratty's Koalas, RGT Australia's women's team. Wendy Wonder Wheels, or Wendy Gallagher, moved from New Zealand to Australia. I don't know why you'd leave paradise if you lived there, but I'm sure Australia is proud to have you. So we're beginning to get into the peaks and troughs of this first climb, going into the first descent. So if you're new to this, and this is your first time watching, we do have this elevation profile in the center bottom of your screen there. So the greens and relative greens are your relative flats. Going into the ambers, turning into the blood orange color, into the dark red is the sign of the intensity of the climbs. So as you can see, we're getting into a very intense climb now. But what are the dark blues and even darker purples? Well, going into light blue is going to be a mild descent. Going into darker blue is, of course, that intensity increasing of a descent. And then going into purple is where you would, in the real world, very likely be spun out. Luke Webster here, a contender who we've seldom seen on the front of the pack, is beginning to really push through the climb. But Mark Robon, another Northern Hemisphere contender, is beginning to really gun it through that climb. Now we know that Mark Rowbottom is a little bit of a rollier, maybe leaning a little bit closer to climbing, so he might have a little bit of an edge as we get towards the switchbacks that we see towards the end of today's course, towards the end of the road that we find ourselves on today, which takes us up to the very picturesque commune that you would have seen in the live photos of that are taken as some of the tourist destinations along the route in rural France that takes us up there. So we can also see the color-coded bars that change color beneath the name tags of each contender. Now, if today is your first time of joining us, well, green again would be around about your optimal, so your FTP number, maybe a little bit under, and that is functional threshold power. That is the power and intensity that you as a rider can hold for anywhere between 20 minutes and 1 hour. It's a metric that is used for testing and for all the kinetic sciences that go into that. Then as we get into the ambers, that's as we go in that small percentile over. As we get into the blood orange kind of color, that's as we're getting into the sub anaerobic, and full dark red or crimson is as we get into the full anaerobic. So we can see there Mark Rowbottom, who's now playing catch up to Nick Greenhalgh, and he is one of the top contenders for Razio Racing, and he is complemented by Matt Hammond, Igor Kopsy, Ingmar van Beurs, Mark Rowbottom, and Andrei Krajewski. Now Mark is beginning to fly again, but what's going on in the Northern Hemisphere side of the race? It's interesting, we have a race 3R contender who is often complimentary to his team, but never really at the front of the pack, and it's Jeppe Snevert, who is being complemented by Said Carradine. Igor, as I said, as a rollier, he's using the downhills to put in a bit of an attack today, attacking the downhills, looking to gain the advantage for coming into the flats and going into the climbs as a rollier. And this is very fantastic to see, because Igor was right at the top at the start of the tour, had kind of paced himself back a little bit, but I've got a feeling that today he's banking all on today's stage, ready to be able to put in a nice big surge effort on Versailles to Paris as our 9th stage. Jonathan Orr beginning to take the lead there. So we can see that we have 3 teams padding out the breakaway group here. So we've got Race 3R, and we can see that from their baby blue, white, red and black kits there. We can also see, of course, Kasper Hedderdam is in the force, so that is E-Cycle Club Denmark, again denoted by their dark red, white and black kit. And then we can also see Razio Racing with their black and orange kit. But who is Kasper Hedderdam complemented by? Well, he's complemented by Nicky Haugard, Kurt Pedersen and Rasmus Feldball. So we're seeing a lot of jostling coming through this downhill attack. Certainly this is a percentile gradient that I would not be comfortable attacking in the real world. So good on these riders for doing so. How does Race 3R work with, my apologies, how does Wahoo RGT work with its physics? We'll come back to that in a second. But Jonathan Orr and Said Carradine here are complemented by Jan Vanner, Evan Oystensen, Anders Ostergaard and Jeppe Snevert. It's fantastic to see Jeppe, who is a rival Dane to Kasper, right in the 4 here as well. But beginning to get a breakaway themselves are Jonathan and Said. So that's going to be interesting to follow. So going back to my previous thought there, how does Wahoo RGT work? If you are new to this, perhaps interested in trying it, well, you can try it with either a rear wheel on turbo trainer, whether that's fluid or magnetic, and you'll need sensors. You'll need a speed sensor, a cell battery powered speed sensor, which rather than being on your front wheel, as you would do in the outside world, would need to be on your rear wheel. You also need a cadence sensor, which will go on the inside of your left crank arm. And those will function either by ANT+ or Bluetooth, both of which Wahoo RGT can function with. Or you can do as many of us do and get a rear wheel off direct drive smart trainer. This has everything baked into it, all of your sensors, and allows for all of the physics to be fed from game, which is done on a real-world calculation of how this would feel in the real world on real roads with the real elevation, real terrain, into your DirectDrive Smart Trainer, and it gives you, through a electromagnetically controlled resistance wheel, or flywheel if you will, it gives you the real world feeling of that resistance. But let's take a look at what's going on in time slot 1 for a little bit. So we have Igor Kopse, who's playing catch up here, and is beginning to break away from the rest of our breakaway group here to chase on to Jonathan and Sade. Jonathan certainly used the plateauing out, and Sade I should say, used the plateauing out of this very steep downhill to attack and make a bit of a breakaway. But Casper Haddadam is not going to let go of his locked on vision, his tunnel vision of the rear wheel of Igor Kopse. But neither is Alistair McAlpine. Watching Alistair has been interesting, as we've seen him come from being in the chase groups that are right behind the breakaway groups to being right in the breakaway group, and this is fantastic to see a UK contender right in the fore here. And who complements Alistair? Well, we have James Melville, Stevie Cooper and Ian Hepburn, and here we can see that gap, that swath of tarmac between Igor, Alistair, Casper and the like, and Jonathan and Sade in front of them is being eaten away at. And Jeppe Snever now finds himself in Shas Patat, the potato chase position, but he is going to be less isolated, less lonely, as he is now joined by friends Anthony Debray. We've got Kevin Barkley as well, Alex Plager. Now Alex Plager has been one to watch as well, as he finds his place, learning how to, or figuring out how to pace his effort and when to surge as well, which has been an interesting development to watch throughout the Chase the Yellow Tour series. But complementing Kevin Barkley, who we can see on screen here, we have Tony Lake, Andy Wadess, James Ogilvie, James Melville, and Stephen Elliott. And we have our webcams here as well, and I'm loving that fantastic, very funky wig on Rasmus Feldbald from E-Cycle Club Denmark, who we can see on the bottom left there. In the top right we have Jan Hansen, who again is making the cadence look easy, making the symmetry of cadence look like an art form. Top left we have Gordon Jackson, a very familiar name to viewers of the Love Triple T or Love Team Time Trial series and the React E-Cycle Race series as well. So James Melville and James Ogilvie, the two Jameses, along with Nicky Haugaard, a teammate of Rasmus Feldbad, who we saw on the webcam there, are in one of our main chase groups here, as the chase group ahead of them is slowly beginning to latch onto the breakaway group. So this may be interesting as we come through the relative flat here, as we see that breakaway group become less solitary, shall we say. And my apologies, that was Scott Francis from RGT Australia on the bottom right. I forgot to announce that. Looks like he's going very fierce on his bike there. We were seeing full flex on the bike. That looked fantastic to see. That's when you know there's certainly some kilojoules of energy being pumped through the rider and cranked through the crank arms. So OTR Spartans complementing Neil Walker here. We have Jonathan Bird, Peter Austin, Gordon Jackson, who we saw on the webcam there, Richard Wagstaff, Robin Sanderson and Shane Blackmore. Looking to latch onto the chase group just ahead of them and bring along their fellow chasees, which now includes Andrei Krajewski, Felix Castro of West London Peddlers. So it's going to be interesting to see if our riders here can make the cut and really latch on. So, complimenting Felix Castro, we have Dave Morrison, we have Christophe Quentin, we have Tobias, aka Toby Bjork, we have Michael Serge, and we have Jürgen Janssens. Hello again, Christoph. It's wonderful to hear from you as always. Good luck in today's race, and good luck to all contenders out on the tarmac today. Alex Plager is in a good place right now. He's at his FTP, so knowing to pace right now and not to gun it too hard, otherwise he might blow his chase effort. But in time slot 1, we've got Vince Taylor here, who's looking to catch on to the rear wheel of a regular to both the webcam and the races here in his Velocity kit. It's Carl Zander Persson from RGT Sweden. We can see Anders Ostergaard up there in this very big chase bunchy here, arguably a chase peloton. You can see Chris Morgan there, another familiar name to followers of RGT Australia in all of the race series I mentioned, including React E-Cycle Race Series and Love Triple T. So Vincent Taylor and Carl there is looking like he's jostling between his positions on the peloton. But right up near the front we can see Lorenzo Simons, who has been a real fierce sprint contender in the Southern Hemisphere races. We've got Ash Yelland as well. Noel Holder, who's another familiar name to people who've been following the top RGT Australia team, Cadell Sharks. We've got Scott Francis, who we saw on the webcam there. Oh, looks like a little bit of a technical here with Race Rear contender King Tubby and David Bors. So, as we get into the mixed elevation, we can see that once again, as it always does and as I always comment on, it's beginning to string out and elasticize our contenders on course today, taking away any chance of a big peloton and kind of dashing those hopes, if you will. We've got Barry Lowe here, one of the organizers for the whole RGT Australia teams, for the whole league, if you will. Peter Neutzeling, Kat Coleman there right in the mix, followed by Michelle Williams, two of the top contenders in the top 5 for the women's GC. Kat Coleman, who describes herself as not really being much of a climber, so today might be a fierce challenge for Kat, but we'll have to see what comes out in the wash, if you will. What our riders have left in their quads and glutes as we get closer to those fierce switchbacks coming up. And right at the lead of the race here, we've got Bo Duke, who again, very inspirational rider, who went through a major spinal surgery in 2016. Looking unlikely to be able to return to the bike, but as you can see, one of the top contenders from across the world in Chase the Yellow. So if you ever needed inspiration to get you back in the saddle, to get you training up, and to get you putting in some fierce effort, look no further than Mr. Duke. Rasmus Feldbar there right in the mix at the front of the Australia side of the race as well, who we saw on the webcam there with his fantastically funky wig. And Jonathan now is beginning to break away, even beginning to leave his teammate Sade behind. But how long can he hold this up for? We see a lot of the dark reds of the climbs coming up. Is there a potential that Jonathan might cook both the effort in his legs and in his cardio system? Because certainly now we can see Casper is now beginning to eat away at that distance like it's nothing. So let's jump on over to the Northern Hemisphere or live side of the race. So yeah, Jonathan, that breakaway that looked very impressive has been reduced to but mere feet. But it looks like his teammate here is perhaps going to aid him with pacing this climb. So we've got Sade Carradine there, Casper is keeping very stable. We can see that Casper, again, if you look at the color-coded bar beneath the name tags, normally we'll see Casper go into the full dark red, which he's in right now for full anaerobic. But we can see that through the climb and through some of the fiercest points of the climb, he was staying in the dark amber. So certainly it looks like Casper is pacing himself, knowing that the worst of the race is yet to come. But having said that, Jonathan is in a place where he's beginning to do the same, or is this a sign that he is beginning to cook already? We will find out as we go along. And how is Igor coming along on that chase effort? He's beginning to close that distance. We know that Igor is a roller. We know that he is expert from previous stages. If you've seen our broadcast, he is expert at knowing when to pace and when to surge. I suspect that as a rider who is fully seasoned in varied elevation, given that he has been a UCI champion for Grand Fondos around the world, or as they may be known in Britain and France, Sportives. Certainly I think that Igor knows how to pace a race like this, and we may see him put in a very phenomenal surge, certainly as we get to the foothills of what will become the switchbacks. So it looks like Sade has taken the lead of the race there, but in our main chase position here, chasing onto the breakaway, of which Igor is about to latch on to, we can see Alasdair McAlpine, Anthony Debray, we can see Vircom Espa, we can see Christophe Contant, who left that wonderful comment and usually leaves wonderful comments as well, and Jeppe Snever, who was right on the head of the race at the beginning, but still isn't far behind. So putting in a phenomenal effort. Certainly we know that Jeppe is maybe more akin to being a sprinter, so today's race is going to be tough, but to see him doing so well and so close to this chase position of this breakaway that we're watching right now is certainly a testament to how this tour and keeping up with the fitness required for it has certainly boosted the training and the physicality of riders such as Jeppe Snever as we've gone along. So Vincent Taylor in the main chase position there on time slot 1 on the Aussie side of the race, being chased by Anders Ostergaard and Rasmus Feldbard, who we saw again on our webcams. But Vincent Taylor not far behind at all. It's sub 90 meters at this point. Anders pacing right now, so we can see Scott Francis there. He is putting in a phenomenal effort. I'm wondering if Scott is actually on rollers, because he has got a real rock to his bike there. And if he's on rollers, I mean, hat off to you, sir, for being brave enough to do that. So we can also see, again, Rasmus Feldbauer in that very funky wig, the funky afro on the bottom left there. In the top right, we have Jan Hansen from E-Cycle Club Denmark, and from OTR Punchers in the top left, we have Gordon Jackson. Everyone's form looking really good right now on the webcams. I think Scott's hurting right now, as we can see. Lovely pain face, Scott. I love seeing a good pain face. And Jan Hansen normally looks very well calm and collected. Arguably the poster child, quite literally, for the sport. But I can see a pain face there. I can see mouth agape as VO2, or the top end of where you can have your nice deep breaths turning into shallow breaths. And certainly fierce climbs will do that to any rider. And we spoke about the physics and physicality of how Wahoo RDT functions, so you can certainly get an understanding of how it's putting that pain into our real world riders who are riding here virtually today on their road bikes in their pain caves. So now we've begun to clear that fierce climb, getting into this nice big trough, or one of the big troughs that we're about to see. A relative flat, arguably, a downhill going into a slight uphill before we get into the fierce climb ahead. So there's barely inches in it, rear wheel to front wheel, in the top 3 contenders in the Northern Hemisphere side of the race here, between Jonathan, Sade and Casper. And it looks like our chase group, which is beginning to string out a little bit, going into that downhill and the relative flat on the southern hemisphere side of the race. But Vincent Taylor is really flying here, and he is going to catch the lead in no time at all. Chris Morgan from RGT Australia, right in the four there. But Chris Morgan, who's usually more of a sprinter, and certainly we see in his efforts come out on the relative flat here, is beginning to usurp Vincent Taylor's effort, chasing the breakaway 2. And Chris Morgan is complemented today by Ben Kirk, Bo Duke, Luke Webster, Noel Holder, and Tristan Dimmock. Tristan's another fierce contender who hopefully we'll see some nice big attacks from as we get into it. And Lorenzo Simons now beginning to get to a point where he feels comfortable pushing ahead. And again, that's more of a sprinter, or certainly what we've seen of his efforts is more of a sprinter's efforts in the Chase the Yellow Tour so far. Certainly pushing ahead to get ready for the climb so that not all of the effort is having to be surged in the climb. So get ahead and then push into a place where you can pace. And Lorenzo Simons will have his efforts today complemented by Daniel Schush, Francois Icard, Mike Wareham, Wouter Claus, and Joe Rowe. And with Razio Racing here, we can see Nick Greenhalgh beginning to catch on. But let's take a quick look at the Northern Hemisphere side of the race. So beginning to get to the zenith of today's climb, not the last of today's climb by any means. We can see that again, it's mere centimeters, arguably getting down to millimeters between front wheel to rear wheel here, between Casper and Sade and Jonathan. But let's see what happened with these very steep downhills as we cross our purple marker here, which denotes the halfway point. So again, that dark purple is denoting a very steep climb. What percentile are we on? So a -8, -9. So certainly in the real world, if you weren't already spinning at fast feet in the high tension gear, you would be spun out at this point, unless you're willing to burn off some of your brake pads by tempering your brake with your pedal strokes. And we have a wonderful helicopter cam here with that sound effect that I'm certain, much like myself, transports you to being as though you were in France with the Tour de France, the helicopter cam flying overhead, and all of our vision mixing today, wonderful vision mixing, all of the wonderful virtual cameras that we see that take us through today's broadcast are provided by Damon, the maestro of ZMS Esports Studio, who we can see live from said studio in the UK. Good day to you, sir. And so we're flying for our downhill here, getting into the point of freewheeling into these corners. So we can see Carl Zander Persson there, usually on the webcams, not with us on the webcam today, but beginning to fly there. RGT Sweden contender Luke Webster as well, of RGT Australia, finding the place where he's pacing here at his FTP or thereabouts, as we can see again by the color-coded bar. So we can certainly see that the difference in cadence as well. And again, you can follow along with what our real world riders are doing as their cadence simply by watching the animation of their avatar on course. Because so long as they have a cadence meter attached, whether that is a cell battery powered cadence meter on a either fluid or magnetic turbo trainer, or the baked in cadence meter that come with a direct drive smart trainer, then you'll be able to see like for like cadence. And we certainly see that going through the climb there, Scott Francis is in a world of hurt, as is Gordon Jackson. Wonderful paint faces, guys, they're glorious. And Jan Hansen still just between 90 and 100 in the cadence, just making it look easy. Certainly if there's one rider I've seen who has really dedicated themselves to becoming an expert in the field of cadence. It is Jan Hansen. Igor Kopse here, beginning to fall a little bit off the chase effort, but I still suspect that Igor is pacing and holding very strong for where he knows, as the expert he is in the field of racing, of when to attack. So we will see that soon, I'm pretty sure, but only 70 meters behind, which in these relatively steep areas that we find ourselves in on today's course is not much. All it needs is for your front rider to push themselves just a little too hard in a climb, cook that effort, allow a little bit too much of the old lactic acid to build in the quads, let your quads become a bit too solid, and then that's it. Your contender, who's only 70, now 60 meters behind, is now right at the top of you. And certainly we can see the name tag of Casper up ahead becoming larger and larger, growing from the horizon. James Melville in the main chase position now, pushing ahead for the Glasgow United Cycling Club, complemented by teammate Alistair McAlpine. But V. Comespa is in a hot chase position right here and looking to upset the Scottish chase effort. So now we're in another steep, if not short, downhill, and Igor is pacing the cornering here very well, knowing that pacing it incorrectly and losing speed to these corners via the cornering penalty that can be implemented in Wahoo RGT will cost him time and distance on the chase effort. So as a refresher, a palate cleanser if you will, to remind yourselves of where we currently are, we'll take a look at our 3D aerial view map. So we're currently going through the troughs that you see here, going through the valley, through our various towns, before we switch back, loop back, and begin to attack the switchbacks that will take us up to the little Catholic commune at the top there, at the top of Mont Vanier. So Casper here holding very steady onto the rear wheel of his contenders from race 3 ahead. But I spoke a little bit of the cornering penalty that occurs in Wahoo RGT, and I guess I shouldn't leave that there as a hanging tendril, unattended. I should actually inform you of how that works. So you can do corner steering with a Elite Sturzo Smart in-game, but normally this is about pedaling tactics, and it's about teaching you how, much like Jan Hansen, of how to perfect your cadence and how to perfect pedaling tactics for cornering in the real world. So in other words, for a steep corner on a downhill, much as we saw Igor doing, in the real world you want to freewheel and do much as you would to avoid your inside pedal, or the pedal that you're going to be leaning towards, from colliding with the road, which is to pull your knee up and to put the outside leg, or the leg that you're leaning away from, down. Both as a balance, a counterbalance measure, but to make sure, because again a road bike has a lower clearance on the pedals to the road, you want to make sure you don't collide and send yourself flying head first to presumably a toothless fate. But Igor here, again, just as I suspected, he had used that cornering tactic to his benefit, as we can see from our wonderful helicopter cam, to catch on to this, and wow, has he ever catched on. And again, like I say, all you have to do is wait for the effort to melt of your fellow contender on these fierce climbs, and you've caught them already. Igor now getting to catch some of that wonderful draft benefit, going through the relative flats, and in a good position to start a nice uphill attack as we close in on those switchbacks. And that looks like the shortest part of the race at the end there, but believe me, to our contenders on course today, it will feel like the longest, and it certainly won't be the fastest part of today's course. But what if you wanted to take on the Chase the Yellow Tour? Well, obviously it's a bit too late now, seems as we're one stage away from the end, to form a team, register the team with ZMS Esports Studio, and to then place your stages in the pen and contend. But what you can do instead, anytime between July 4th and the end of the month, July 31st, you can sign up for Challenge Road from Col de Telegraph to Col de Galibert. And that is a fierce course, 34 kilometers with an almost continuous climb that ends up being a cumulative elevation gain of just over 2 kilometers. It's available 24/7 and it's treated as an ITT or individual time trial. You go and compete, and there will be a general classification at the end of all of this as we get into the start of August. In other words, fastest time wins. And how will you find out? Well, why didn't you head on over to the ZMS Esports Studio Facebook page, give us a like and a follow, and you'll be able to see the results when they're posted there. Mark Rowbottom beginning to take the lead on the Aussie side of the race for Razio Racing, and doing a stunning job of it, going through this mild climb. Surely his calves and quads are screaming already, but he's pacing, as we can see there, in sub-anaerobic. A little bit of a gentler place in sub-anaerobic, and that's a good place to be in for pacing. Faster feet, so we can assume that he has switched over to the small chainring in a fair to middle chain tension, or high tension gear, I guess, is what I mean to say there. As we can see, the higher cadence, so beginning to massage those legs out, ready for the very fierce climb ahead. So Igor Kopse now flying on the European and Northern Hemisphere side of the race there, getting ahead and in the lead position. Rasmus Felbard in a lead chase position there, looking to catch up to Bo Duke and Mark Rowbottom, who we just saw at the lead of that race. But Jonathan Orr now getting into the full anaerobic to chase. But is Igor luring him into a position where he's going to, once again, fill up those all-important quads with lactic acid, turn them a bit too hard, a bit too solid, and then allow them to turn to jelly just in time for the climb? We will find out, friends, as we get into this final trough of the relative flats, relative downhills, before we get those all-important switchbacks. So Scott Francis there, really looking like he's in a whole place of hurt, but looking like he's having a hell of a lot of fun as well. And we can't say fairer than that, can we? So Jan Hansen, I think, freewheeling through a downhill. Hopefully not on a technical there. Certainly we can see very shallow breaths right now. Use some time to recover, my friend, and get back in the fold. We know you've got it in you. Igor flying ahead there. He's got a one-man breakaway. He's just sailing. He could honestly raise the sail at this point because he is just sailing ahead. Casper ahead of them, looking like he's in a place where he's ready to push, perhaps get a bit of a surge in, ready for the climb. But that might be a dangerous position to be in if you surge too hard before that climb. Bo Duke really just flying here. Really just surging ahead. Mark Rowbottom very close to his rear wheel, using that draft benefit through this relative flat, this trough that we find ourselves in, and looking to catch up. Lorenzo Simons right in the fore of that chase effort, looking to catch on. But Igor pacing out his effort through this relative downhill, ready for the big attack ahead. So now I'm wondering if Jonathan Orr, Said Carradine and Casper are perhaps pacing as well, not looking to surge ahead because they know that they might be lured into a position where they have to really attack. So as a result, they might actually just be pacing around about FTP, waiting it out, timing and watching with a very trained eagle eye on Igor for when he attacks in the switchbacks. Vincent Taylor in the lead for chase on the Southern Hemisphere side of the race. Mark Rowbottom now has switched round with the front, and I'm beginning to suspect that these two who have now, we've seen on a number of stages, formed allegiances, cross-team allegiances, across team lines, I'm starting to suspect that they are now once again working on a little two-man pace line here and waiting until the right time where, again, the alliance will fall apart and they'll put in their final big effort going into the switchbacks. That's certainly what it appears to be, because it certainly appears that they are not tackling each other to get into lead position. It looks like they're taking small turns being the engine and then being the person who takes advantage of that draft benefit. And they might be even communicating that between each other through the baked-in communication method, the verbal or auditory communication method that is baked into Wahoo RGT, which is called Race Radio. And once again, on screen here, we can see Scott Francis taking a much-needed drink of water. Rasmus Feldbard still rocking that afro. We've got Jan Hansen, who has found his breath again, taken that all-important rest, and is back to his very, very well-maintained 90 to 100 range of cadence. And we can see Gordon Jackson there getting into a good rhythm again. It must be a Scandinavian thing, because we can see Rasmus Feldbard there, much like Carl that we've seen in previous stages, putting in such a fierce effort, getting the body heat up so high that, much like Carl, there is no base layer, there is no jersey, just bib shorts. That also may be because, while it is funny and awesome to see the faux afro, it's probably very hot on the head. So it's fantastic to see Rasmus with such a hot faux afro on the head in the lead chase position here. So James Melville and Alistair McAlpine are pinning in their French rival here as they soar for Scotland, hopefully to catch on to the rear wheel of Igor, Jonathan Said and Casper. They have got a little bit of a distance to make up, however. They've got 1.3 kilometers. It may be a little bit late for that now, but how much will the speed of Igor, Said, Jonathan and Casper slow down as we begin to really grip our way through the switchbacks that lie only a kilometer or so ahead? And through all of this time, as the kilometers and meters have been ticking away, I forgot to avert your eyes to the top center of the screen, where we have the gold and black checkered flags that you can see there. The left-hand side one is live, or the Northern Hemisphere side of the race, which we are looking at now. The right-hand side one, TS1 replay, is time slot 1 replay, aka the Southern Hemisphere side of the race. I've had a lot of fun communicating to you, the audience, throughout the Chase the Yellow Tour, to keep an eye on that and to see which side of the race is faster. It began being Northern Hemisphere for the first two stages. It was then taken over by Southern Hemisphere, and then for the past couple of stages it's been neck and neck. However, today, by half a kilometre, the Northern Hemisphere side of the race is well ahead. And that is because with the mixed elevation today, certainly Cadel Sharks have been unable to do their paceline effort, which has made them incredibly fast, and sharing out their effort with sprinters such as Tristan Dimmock, who's aided them along the way. Tristan, who is a lawyer in Canberra, so being the capital city, one would assume public law, government law, public policy law, something like that. But will we see him slam the gavel down today and really put the watts through the crank arms, really stretch out the chain with that chain tension, and really put in a nice big attack here? He'll need a lot to beat Mark Rowbottom here, but teammate Bo Duke is certainly going to be putting in a very good GC time today for Cadel Sharks. And now, as we can see on the Northern Hemisphere side of the race, we are beginning to climb into those switchbacks. And we can see just how grippy that's becoming with how slow things have become. And I know in the real world where I've taken on 15% gradients when I went back for Christmas to the UK, and took on some of the fierce hills of West Suffolk in England. And yes, I did say Suffolk, because if you're listening to that as an Englishman, you're probably going, wait, but Suffolk's flat. Yes, central Suffolk and Waveney, Suffolk are very flat, but the rolling hills of West Suffolk will certainly put a pinch in the quads. And certainly I know that when you feel that, and when you feel yourself beginning to slow down like a tank, certainly it feels like your front wheel is the only wheel that really wants to move, and you can feel that fluidity in the handlebars but nowhere else, and it just feels like you're going leg over leg to get nowhere, until finally you reach the zenith, much as we can see on the convex of the switchback here, where it flattens out a little bit. That's where the riders will be beginning to feel that relief, going, oh, finally. Only to do it once again for the next switchback. But taking advantage of that tiny bit of reprieve will certainly be enough for riders such as Igor, Jonathan, Sade and Casper to get enough for a little bit of a punch ahead, ready to cook the effort enough to need the next convex or apex maybe of the corner here, going into the next switchback, and round we go. So only 3 kilometers left in it. Casper is now surging ahead. Rolliers, as we've discussed, all-rounders to put it in English, they are somebody who is an expert at climbing and sprinting. Arguably they are a jack of all trades and master of none, however. So it's interesting to see where Rolliers have a little bit of an advantage in one given area. So certainly we can see that Casper is beginning to really fly as a climber. Igor is not far off, but Jonathan and Sade are arguably a little bit more skewed towards sprinting. So Casper is really just flying here full anaerobic, full dark red in that color-coded meter. And beginning to really get advantage of those tight hairpin corners at the end of each switchback, and using it, as I said, to full advantage, softening out the lactic acid only to re-inject some more. But Igor is not far behind now. There is a chance that Igor may cause an upset here. Certainly we know that Igor paces climbs very well. You may look at the color-coded bar there and see that he's not putting out as much effort and think, well, he's not going to catch. But I know that Igor can pace on a climb. And certainly we may see him shoot off like a rocket into the stratosphere. And that could come at any moment. Bo Duke is the one who is flying, and certainly we can see his power as a real-world climber coming to the fore right here as we go through the switchbacks, taking us up to the commune at the top of Mont Vernier. But Mark Rowbottom not far behind, in a little bit of a chasse-patate position now, but there's certainly a large swath of tarmac between him and that fairly sizable chase group that we saw led by Rasmus Felber. So race 3R here, both pacing their effort going through the climb. I suspect that a lot of our contenders going through here who are rolliers and climbers, as their expertise, are going to be saving it for the final couple of switchbacks. But complementing Sade and Jonathan, just to refresh your memory, is Jan Vanner, Evan Oystensen, Anders Ostergaard and Jeppe Snevert. So still almost half a kilometre ahead on the Northern Hemisphere side of the race. And that is being led by Casper Heiderdam, who is eating away at that distance remaining. Maybe beginning to cook a little bit on his effort here, because that full anaerobic we saw is beginning to ebb away. Maybe beginning to save a little bit and beginning to pace a little bit, get back into that VO2 max. I don't know. But it's possible that he's also reining again a little bit, knowing that Igor's catching, so that he still has something left in the tank, that little 10 to 15% left, to be able to put in a nice little attack as we get into the final few switchbacks that lie ahead. but certainly you get an idea of how fierce of a climb this would be in the real world. It might not be an Alpe d'Huez, but it's certainly not far off. So Mark Rowbottom here on the Aussie side of the race for Rezio Racing in the main chase position, looking to catch on to Bo Duke, who's beginning to pace out his effort a little bit. I think again, knowing that Mark Rowbottom is beginning to close that gap, looking to hold a little something in for the final leg of the race. But Bo has certainly been doing a fantastic effort on the course today. Now, we were talking about that chase group being 1.3 kilometers behind and talking about they might be able to close some of that up as we get closer. And we saw there, if you looked at Lorenzo Simon's distance behind, he was only half a kilometer behind. So he certainly managed to eat away at 800 meters because of our top contenders getting into the climb there and slowing down a bit. The trouble is he now has to make up that distance and maintain that distance gained, if you will, as he gets into the switchbacks himself, so he could once again lose that distance. But Casper Hederdam still flying here, almost one switchback length ahead of Igor. But Igor, again, much like the Terminator, he's got that target in his heads-up display, in his infrared vision, and he is gunning for the rear wheel of Casper Hederdam. So we can see Chris Morgan beginning his ascent there on the Southern Hemisphere side of the race, followed by Nick Greenhalgh and Tim Rice as well. Anders Ostergaard beginning to really push ahead, which is interesting to see. Bo Duke still staying sub-anaerobic right now, knowing that Mark Rowbottom isn't far behind, so he's pacing but not softening too much, knowing that he still has to hold something back, because in the back of his mind he'll be making those calculations of where Mark Rowbottom might possibly be making his attacks. It's all a calculation, but it's also entirely guesswork. So Casper here getting back into the full anaerobic, so certainly, as I was saying, he held back enough to be able to push again, and he's beginning to push here, knowing that this is the steepest part of the climb, or at least the longest continuous steep part of the climb so far. So certainly expert effort there that he's begun to form over the tour of knowing when to pace and when to attack through these very steep climbs. So currently Casper is 3 minutes and 22 seconds behind Jonathan Orr, but now having surged ahead by such a large margin, can he beat the GC of Jonathan Orr? I think we're very close to finding out. But I don't know about you, this is beginning to become edge of your seat stuff. Jonathan Orr and Said having conquered the apexes of those corners, those tight corners through the switchbacks, are now in a position to gain ground. So will Jonathan be able to hold on to his GC time? Will Casper strike off enough time to usurp Jonathan's top spot on the GC board for men? It's all a question of if and when. Rasmus Feldbaud in a good chase position still. Bo Duke still just flying here, but we can see that Mark Rowbottom is beginning to catch up. He's 190 meters behind, and you can see that by looking at the black and gold chart to the center left of the screen. Noel Holder, a teammate of Bo Duke, is in a good chase position there. We can see Carl Zander Persson of RGT Sweden, who is a regular to the webcam feed, is beginning to make some good pace through the switchbacks. Casper still just flying to the full anaerobic, knowing that a relative flat for a little tiny finish line sprint just lies ahead. We had no Flamme Rouge today, so you didn't get to see that, and I didn't get to use my increasingly good pronunciation of French that I've perfected by accident over the course of the Chase the Yellow Tour. So a little tiny gunning effort here. So it looks like just ahead of Boduk is Casper Heiderdam out of both races here. And beginning to fly, and this is certainly in the bag for Casper Heiderdam. Well done, sir. Fantastic victory. It all was clinched on the climb. We saw a lot of jostling for the lead position in the breakaway group in the Northern Hemisphere or live side of the race. And Casper certainly pinned it all on the climb, as did all of the contenders, but Casper was the one on the day who had it in the legs to do it. Igor Kopse put in a phenomenal effort to take the lead for a while, and certainly that is an effort to be cheered as well. To be applauded, if you will. Jonathan coming in for the third place position. Another great effort from Jonathan. And Said not far behind, about 5 meters behind. And so Boduk closing in on that finish line. And he's managed to maintain that lead by pacing again and knowing when to hold it. He's holding it for this final few hundred meters, or final 150 meters I should say, to cross the finish line and managed to hold Mark Robotham, who's a very fierce rollier, at bay. Fantastic stuff. Well done, Bo. So Mark Robotham here not far behind. So 653 meters of cumulative elevation gain today on Mont Vanier. And certainly we saw how that effort really stung in the legs of our riders as they close in on that finish line. Mark Robotham's effort here has been phenomenal. Really held on and gripped through the hoods as he got to the top of the climb here today. Perhaps leaning a little bit more to sprinting as a rollier. That's certainly been a phenomenal effort to see. Really juiced through those crank arms. Lorenzo Simon's beginning to close in. Alistair McAlpine and V. Kamasma closing in on the Northern Hemisphere side of the race too. Lorenzo certainly being one to watch out of the Central European contenders for Belgium there with Moon Riders. And certainly we can see on the finish line here how a real tough climb like this really, once again, really stretches that elastic band of the riders. It's never a peloton like this. It is all chasse patate. Much like when you see the live feeds of the actual Tour de France when they go up Alpe d'Huez. Very rarely is there a little bunchy or a peloton altogether. Everyone's at different levels of the race. There are different levels of riders, whether that's sprinters, climbers, rolliers, in that kind of race too. But what complements our Chase the Yellow Tour is the fact that having shorter stages, it allows riders and racing contenders of all fitness levels to be here on the course as well, which really just complements that idea of there being different abilities in races, again ranging from your climbers, sprinters to rolliers. Chris Morgan and Noah Holder, teammates of Boduk, closing in on that finish line. I'm sure they will be very happy to cross that finish line and soothe those quads, soothe those glutes, and begin to stretch out those calves a bit. So our next race will be on Saturday, the final race of the Chase the Yellow Tour here on Wahoo RGT, Stage 9, Versailles to Paris. And I'll be here again as your host, and I hope to see you there. It's the last one. Everything hinges on this. To give you that dramatic trailer voice. Ben Kirk closing in on that finish line as well, getting some of the remaining members of Cadel Sharks over the finish line. Rasmus Feldbard, who we saw on the webcam there, easily in the top 10 on the Aussie side of the race. I'm sure he'll be taking off that very hot faux wig, faux afro I mean, and letting the sweat begin to dry on that head. Christophe Contant, who left that wonderful comment earlier, just crossing the finish line there. Nick Greenhalgh as well. And Alex Plager not too far from the head of the race. It's been wonderful to watch Alex Plager begin to progress up the chase effort and be closer and closer to the front of the race with every passing stage. Again, a testament to how this tour has really helped our riders begin to really flesh out their training with essentially a real world application, if you will. So Alex Plager easily crossing that finish line, followed by Stevie Cooper for Glasgow United Cycling Club, who have opted as a team to have the GCN, or Global Cycling Network, kit. I'm sure Dan Baxter, and Simon Sy would be happy to see that, as well as my favourite presenter on there, whose name has just eluded me, the little guy. Ah, damn, that's going to bug me now. The guy who does all the challenges, little short guy, and he sometimes has his dad on there. Somebody drop it in the comments and reinvigorate my tired short-term memory. Kevin Barkley with OTR crossing the finish line here. Mark Wardrop crossing the finish line, a fellow Mark. But just quickly, I looked at his stats. I'll just quickly cover this. He is the same height as me and about 2.2 pounds or 1 kilo off of the same weight as myself. So I'm looking at Mark knowing that as a fellow Mark, that I would be in probably a similar position to where Mark is. I don't know what Mark's expertise are, whether that's sprinting, climbing or rollier. Apparently, according to Wahoo System X, I am apparently a rollier. I know that I'd lean more to climbing for sure, because I don't know where Wahoo got that from. I'm not much of a sprinter. I can maybe put in 300 meters before I've got to edge it back a bit. Maybe it's by the fact that I can hold a high tension gear on a relative flat. But certainly I've been looking and watching Mark Wardrop's effort with keen eyes, because very similar statistics in physicality. It leading me to believe that we could be at a very similar age, I believe. I'm 37, and I believe Mark is around about the same age. And another thing that really has given me an affinity towards watching Mark closely is one of his bikes is a Cervello, and Cervello are a Canadian manufacturer. So it's certainly wonderful to see that Canadian bikes make it that far south to Australia. James Ogilvie there crossing the finish line, James being the founder, organizer and the scorekeeper for Love Triple T, Triple T being shorthand for Team Time Trial if you are a neophyte to such things. Then we've got Pedersen here crossing the finish line, followed hotly by Vince Taylor. Tony Lake with OTR punches. So we've got 2 webcams left. yet to cross the finish line is what that would denote. On the live Northern Hemisphere side of the race, we have Gordon Jackson, the top left window, and the top right window is Jan Hansen. I'm still amazed, just floored by how Jan Hansen just keeps that stable cadence all the time. Clearly has put a lot of training into certainly the cadence side of pace training. One would assume also the ability to hold at a given wattage as well, that side of pace training as well, but certainly one that we can visually see that he has an expertise in is that almost symmetrical, very well paced cadence. Andrei Krajewski here with Razio Racing closing in on that finish line, as is Joe Rowe of the Republic of Ireland. Certainly all these riders will be feeling very reassured seeing the climb plateau out to that finish line and really ease up on those cranks, get the chance to let those legs relax back into a normal state. So Peter Austin and Neil Walker here with OTR, keeping close with one another as teammates to cross that finish line together, ideally for a good GC time for the team. There we go, two team members of OTR across that finish line at a similar time, with Gordon Jackson not far behind. So we've got Wayne Stitterling here. Thank you, Wayne, for your wonderful comment. And yes, well done to everyone on such a great race and great ride today. There is no such thing as a poor effort. If you've made it through those switchbacks, those fierce climbs, that really quite painful mixed bag of elevation, well, you've done a phenomenal effort. You left nothing on the road. Today you put it all into the bike. And that's certainly something to be proud of. David Bors, Ash Yelland, Peter McAnulty all crossing the finish line together. Toby Bjork here for West London Pedalers, crossing that finish line as well. Alright, so let's take a look at our provisional GC, otherwise known as general classification. And this is provisional because we do have a third time slot 2, which is yet to race. And so we will have the fully finalized general classification or cumulative time-based results at the beginning of stage 9. So if you want to see the finalative results from stage 8, you will have to join us on Saturday, which is a good way of getting a repeat viewer out of you. But for now, we have the provisional from both time slot 1 and the live or Northern Hemisphere side of the race. So still holding on to the top spot is Jonathan Orr with a cumulative time from stages 1 through to 7, and that start line to finish line, of course, of 7 hours, 24 minutes and 27 seconds. But eating away at that time of 3 minutes and 23 seconds that Casper had before, and 3 minutes 23 seconds behind Jonathan, is Casper Hederdam with E-Cycle Club Denmark Team 1. He now sits at 7 hours, 27 minutes and 11 seconds. So applying even more heat, even more pressure to Jonathan as we head into Stage 9, Versailles to Paris. 7 minutes and 23 seconds behind his teammate, also with Race 3R, is Said Keradine with 7 hours, 31 minutes and 50 seconds. Bo Duke still doing the Southern Hemisphere and Australia proud in 4th place with Cadel Sharks at 7 hours, 23 minutes and 22 seconds, placing him 7 minutes and 55 seconds behind Jonathan Orr of Race 3R. Igor Kopse of Razio Racing, once again in the top 5, 7 hours, 33 minutes and 23 seconds for a differential of 8 minutes and 56 seconds to round out the top 5 for men. But what about the provisional GC at the end of Stage 8 for women? Well, Kat Coleman is still the one to beat, and she sits at a cumulative time, stages 1 through 7, of 9 hours, 43 minutes and 32 seconds, with a differential of 6 minutes and 22 seconds behind her teammate is Melissa Fanning, 9 hours, 49 minutes and 54 seconds. Michelle Williams, with a differential of 8 minutes and 7 seconds to Kat Coleman, is 9 hours, 51 minutes and 39 seconds. Wendy Gallagher, aka Wendy Wonder Wheels, is sitting at 11 hours with 25 seconds, putting her 1 hour, 16 minutes and 52 seconds behind Kat Coleman. So, making the top 5 and making it all Spratty's Koalas for now is Linda Van Dyke with 12 hours, 54 seconds and 43 seconds, 3 hours, 11 minutes and 10 seconds behind fellow teammate Kat Coleman. But now that we've seen the individual GC, how has this affected the team GC? Well, let's jump on over and take a look. So still holding on very strong to that top spot is Race 3R, and again this is first rider through to last rider clearing the finish line within any given team. So cumulative stages 1 through 8 is Race 3R with 22 hours, 46 minutes and 28 seconds. Now dropping back a little bit to 5 minutes and 43 seconds and hoping to make this up as they get into stage 9 is Cadel Sharks. They are sitting at 22 hours, 52 minutes and 12 seconds. Razio Racing 38 minutes and 52 seconds behind Race 3R, sitting at 23 hours, 25 minutes, 21 seconds. Still holding on very strong to that 4th place position is Scotland's Glasgow United Cycling Club. They are 59 minutes and 44 seconds behind for a cumulative team time of 23 hours, 46 minutes and 13 seconds. And with that phenomenal effort of Casper Hederdam, E-Cycle Club Denmark Team 1 rounds out the top 5 at 24 hours, 34 minutes and 42 seconds, placing them 1 hour, 48 minutes and 13 seconds behind Race 3R. Wow, wowee, what a race we have seen today. So you'll have to join us on Saturday to see the cumulative results as we begin the race. And that is going to be the final stage of Chase the Yellow. And it's been a pleasure bringing this to you alongside Damon at ZMS Esports Studio. And that is Versailles to Paris with very little climbing at all. This will be a sprinter's paradise and maybe one where we might see Cadel Sharks bring in a final finish line upset. But who can tell? The only way to tell will be to join us Saturday, 25 kilometers with a cumulative elevation gain of only 117 meters. Well, it's been a privilege to host today's race for you and to bring it to you live. My name has been Mark. You've been a wonderful audience. Now please have a wonderful day.